So here you are, once again, about to listen to something that doesn't really matter. You could of course be listening to anything else. Something useful perhaps, or informative, or even mildly practical. But no, you've chosen this. A quiet, meandering ramble designed to say nothing at all. And honestly, that's probably for the best. After all, usefulness is overrated, and meaning is exhausting. So let's wander, gently, into a space where things exist only because they don't have to. Where objects don't serve a purpose but simply linger, in the way a cloud lingers over a hill, or a half-remembered dream rests in the back of your mind. Imagine then that there is a drawer. It is not an important drawer, nor an interesting one, and certainly not a drawer you'd go out of your way to open. And yet, somehow, here it is. It slides open with that faint sound drawers always seem to make, half squeak, half sigh, as though the drawer itself is reluctant to reveal its contents. Inside, the first object you see is a spoon. But not a normal spoon. This one has holes drilled neatly along the bowl, as if someone very carefully designed it to be incapable of holding soup. You could try, of course. You could ladle some broth into it, watch it drip straight back out again, and wonder who thought this was a good idea. But then again, perhaps the spoon was never meant for soup. Perhaps it was meant to simply exist, waiting to be picked up, admired briefly, and then put back down again. Next to it lies a shoe. A left shoe, specifically. It is folded, somehow, as though shoes were ever meant to fold. Made entirely of paper, crinkling slightly if you so much as glance at it too directly. You might picture the effort it would take to walk even a single step in it, the certain tear, the immediate disappointment, the crumpled collapse. But the shoe does not seem concerned. It sits peacefully, content in its complete lack of purpose. And further back, half hidden in the shadows of the drawer, there is a clock. Its face is painted, not with numbers, but with small pictures of teapots. And its hands move only backwards, ticking steadily from 10 minutes ago into 20 minutes ago, into the endless comfort of before. A clock that insists the past is always the right time, and that the future inconveniently never quite arrives. This is the beginning of the drawer of useless objects. And it is in its own way quietly perfect. The drawer does not end, of course. No drawer ever really ends if you look at it long enough. It only keeps offering small peculiar things, each one stranger than the last, each one entirely unwilling to explain itself. Near the back, wedged sideways as though embarrassed to be noticed, is a candle. A long, slender candle, made not of wax but of chalk. You could strike a match and hold it to the wick all night long, and nothing would happen. The flame would flicker, impatient, and the chalk would remain cold, stubborn, resolutely candle-shaped but not candle-behaving. And if you pressed it to paper, it would leave a pale trail of dust, the faint suggestion of light, without ever actually giving it. Beside it rests a key. A beautiful, heavy, ornate key, with curling metal loops and an air of significance. It looks important. It feels important. But it belongs to no lock. Try as you might, you will never find the door that accepts it, never discover the treasure it guards, never hear the click of a tumbling mechanism welcoming you inside. The key exists simply to be heavy, and to rattle faintly when placed back into the drawer. There is also, oddly enough, a pair of scissors. Except the blades do not meet. No matter how hard you press, no matter how carefully you align them, they hover a fraction of an inch apart, determined never to touch. You could attempt to cut paper, fabric, or string, but nothing would yield. The scissors are simply two sharp edges, politely declining to cooperate. And finally, tucked in the corner, is a small notebook. Its cover is soft and worn, as though it has been handled countless times. But when you open it, every page is blank, except for the faint imprint of words that have been erased. Not just erased, but erased so thoroughly that they were never truly written. You turn the pages, one after another, and find yourself reading nothing at all, which is oddly more tiring than reading something. The drawer sits quietly, containing all of this, offering nothing in return, and somehow, that feels enough. The drawer is still there, of course. Still waiting, still filled with its unhelpful assortment of objects. Although, now that I think about it, the word drawer itself is strange, isn't it? It can mean the wooden thing you pull open, or a person who sketches. And for a brief moment you can picture a very tired artist being asked to open the drawer, and looking confused as they hold up a pencil instead. But back to the actual drawer, or not really back, since we never really left. Inside, there is something that might be a ruler. A long strip of wood with markings that do not correspond to any known unit. 1 inch is longer than the next. A centimeter curves sideways halfway through. And near the end, there's just a doodle of a small fish. Which is curious because fish have very little to do with measuring, unless you count the expression "it was this big," which isn't really accurate at all. Somewhere near the middle of the drawer, there's also a bell. A tiny silver bell, the kind you might expect to jingle cheerfully when shaken. But when you do shake it, it makes no sound, unless you count the faint noise of your stomach remembering that you once wanted toast. Funny how hunger wanders in, even in places where no toast could possibly appear. Although I suppose if you put bread in a drawer it would only go stale, and you'd forget about it, and later wonder why everything smells faintly of cardboard. The bell sits quietly, not ringing, and next to it is a button. Not a shirt button, but the kind you'd press to turn something on or off. Except, nothing happens when you press it. No light flickers on, no machine hums to life. It just gives a faint click, like the sound of a thought you almost had, but then lost, the way you might lose your place in a sentence. Ah yes, much like right now. And then, tucked between the useless ruler and the silent bell, there is a fork. Except the fork has only one tine, so it is essentially just a small, confused stick. Not quite a fork, not quite a skewer, and definitely not something you'd want at a picnic. Although, now that picnics are mentioned, it's strange how they always involve ants. Nobody ever invites them, and yet they arrive, marching neatly in rows, as if they were sent an invitation by the bread crusts themselves. But no ants live in this drawer, as far as we know. Just the one-tined fork sitting politely, doing nothing, as the drawer closes halfway on its own, as if it too were tired of this. And that is perhaps the most fitting end for now. A drawer that holds objects without use, thoughts without endings, and distractions that go nowhere in particular. There is, as it happens, a hallway. Long, quiet, and stretching further than your attention span is willing to follow. On either side, there are doors. Countless doors. each one the same, and yet not quite the same. The first door you notice is painted blue. But not an ordinary blue, something between sky and blueberry yogurt, the kind of shade that would never win a paint contest, because nobody could agree on what it was supposed to be. The doorknob is brass, though slightly dented, as if someone once tried to open it with their elbow. Which, now that I think about it, is a surprisingly awkward way to open anything. But perhaps elbows were more fashionable as tools in some forgotten century. The next door is slightly taller than the first. Too tall, really, like it was meant for someone who wore stilts as part of their daily routine. It has a keyhole, but no key, unless the useless key from the drawer belongs here, which would make sense, except it doesn't. Because when you try it, the key just hums faintly, as though embarrassed to be wrong. Which is strange, because humming keys aren't usually part of everyday life. Unless you count the hum of a fridge, which isn't a key at all but sometimes feels like one, unlocking the smell of leftovers you'd forgotten you owned. A little further down there is a door with stripes. Not painted stripes, just shadows that decided to arrange themselves that way. If you tilt your head, they almost look like bars. But then again, bars are usually made of metal, not of shadows. Although a prison made entirely of shadows might be quite efficient, if you think about it. Because no one could ever truly escape, except during daylight, or perhaps when someone remembers to switch on a lamp. And then there's a door that isn't really a door at all. It's just painted on the wall. Flat. Two-dimensional. A suggestion of an entrance that never intends to open. Rather like a to-do list that never gets done, or a recipe you clip from a magazine and then never attempt. You could knock, of course, but the only reply would be the hollow sound of your own knuckles, and perhaps a distant memory of cereal. Yes, cereal. Because for some reason, thinking of hollow knocking makes one remember the crunch of cornflakes, though nobody knows why. The hallway stretches on, lined with doors that may or may not exist, each one equally unhelpful. And still, you keep walking, as if the next one might finally decide to matter. The hallway doesn't shorten, of course. It continues, as hallways always do when you expect them not to. And along it, another door. This one has a window set into the top half, a small square pane of glass. But instead of showing what's behind it, the glass only reflects your own shoes. Strangely enlarged, as if you were looking at them through the wrong end of a magnifying glass. Which makes you wonder briefly if anyone has ever actually used a magnifying glass for its intended purpose, rather than to burn small holes in leaves on a sunny afternoon. Another door appears. Painted green. Although it is a green that seems to shift, depending on how tired your eyes are. Sometimes it's mossy, sometimes lime, sometimes the exact unsettling shade of an avocado that has waited a day too long. And behind the door? Well, nothing you can see. Because every time you reach for the handle you remember something irrelevant, like how socks vanish in the wash. Not just the odd one or two, but entire pairs that simply dissolve into the mythology of laundry. Perhaps this door is where they've all gone, piling up in a secret room filled with unmatched cotton and faint scents of detergent. Further down there is a revolving door. Which is strange, because revolving doors do not usually appear in long, silent hallways. This one turns very slowly, endlessly spinning even though nobody pushes it. If you step inside, you might be trapped forever in polite rotation, circling gently like a thought that refuses to land. Rather like the way a song gets stuck in your head, except instead of a tune it's just the phrase turnip stew on repeat. No reason. Just turnip stew circling endlessly, like this door. Past that, another door waits. It's made entirely of mirrors, so instead of an entrance you're confronted with your own reflection. But it's not really your reflection, it's slightly delayed, as if you'd blinked and the reflection hadn't caught up yet. Which is a peculiar thing to imagine, because blinks are supposed to be private. Like sneezes. Or the way you sometimes whisper, to yourself without meaning to. The mirror door doesn't explain itself. It simply reflects slowly and then stops, as though tired of keeping up with you. The hallway hums faintly, though no one knows why hallways hum. Perhaps it's just the air, or perhaps the doors are whispering to one another when you're not listening. Either way, you walk on and the doors keep appearing as if drawn out of the silence itself. The hallway continues, which is the only thing hallways ever really do. Another door appears, this one shaped like an arch. Not a particularly grand arch, just the sort you might sketch if someone asked you to draw a door in less than 5 seconds. It has no handle. You could push it maybe. Or pull it. But then again, handles are overrated, aren't they? You hardly notice them until they're gone, like teaspoons in the office kitchen. They vanish mysteriously, leaving only forks behind, as though people suddenly decided cereal was a fork-based meal. The next door is smaller, perhaps too small. Child-sized, or cat-sized, or possibly made for someone who only ever wanted half a door. It has a knocker shaped like a tiny fist. When you lift it, it doesn't knock, it sneezes. A small, polite sneeze, the kind you'd expect from a mouse who had been reading dusty newspapers. Not that mice read newspapers, of course, although if they did, they would probably skip straight to the crossword. And cheat. Because mice are like that. Further down, you come to a red door. Red in the way tomatoes are red, but not the good ones. The ones that never ripen properly and always look slightly annoyed at you. The paint is peeling, curling into little flakes that look suspiciously like confetti. And speaking of confetti, isn't it odd how it always seems festive when thrown in the air but deeply depressing when you have to sweep it up afterward? Tiny bits of paper that were joyful for 5 seconds, and then suddenly just dust. The door sighs quietly, as if it has heard this complaint before. And then there is a door that has no hinges at all. Just a slab, leaning against the wall, pretending to be part of the hallway. Someone has painted the word push on it, in large capital letters. So you push. And of course nothing happens. Not even a wobble. It simply leans there stubborn, as though it knows perfectly well that it is not, and never has been, a functioning door. Much like umbrellas on windy days, technically designed for usefulness, but in practice, nothing more than an awkward metal flower flipping itself inside out. The hallway, endless as ever, stretches further. You wonder, vaguely, how many doors you've passed now. 10? 50? 100? But the number doesn't matter, in the same way it doesn't matter how many socks are in a drawer, as long as none of them match. The point is simply this: there are doors, they keep appearing, and not one of them seems willing to lead anywhere. Somewhere in a quiet corner of thought, one of those corners you don't usually visit, there sits an encyclopedia. It is very large. Heavy in the way books are heavy when they're more about existing than being read. Its spine creaks softly, as though it resents the idea of being opened. And when you do open it, the pages breathe out a faint smell of dust, cardboard, and something oddly like cucumber sandwiches left too long in the sun. The first entry is under A. Aardvark chair. A chair that looks convincingly like an aardvark until you sit down on it, at which point it sighs dramatically and insists it was never an aardvark in the first place. Its main use is apparently decorative, although no one agrees on what it decorates. Possibly the concept of disappointment. On the opposite page is air, bottled. Not fresh air, not mountain air, not even city air. Just air. Collected at random, sealed in jars, and carefully labeled with dates that make no sense. Some are dated August 47th. Others simply say whenever. The encyclopedia lists no explanation, only the casual reminder that air in a bottle is still air, but somehow less satisfying. Like the feeling of reheated tea, or applause that arrives 2 beats too late. Flipping further along, a word catches the eye: banana shadow. This is defined as the outline left behind when a banana has already been eaten. It cannot be measured, weighed, or photographed, and yet the entry claims everyone has seen one, even if they don't remember. Which feels suspiciously true, the way most suspicious things do. You pause briefly to consider the last banana you ate. Not the banana itself, but the vague memory of its absence, which is apparently the point. The pages turn themselves, lazily, as though the encyclopedia is tired of you being so slow. It stops at C. Here, you find cloud drawer. A drawer that, when opened, contains a small personal cloud, gray and puffy, drifting gently above the folded socks. The encyclopedia notes that this cloud occasionally rains, though only on Thursdays, and only if you've forgotten your umbrella. Which you almost always have. Because umbrellas are like teaspoons, they disappear exactly when you need them and multiply pointlessly when you don't. The book is thick, impossibly thick, and the pages whisper faintly as you move them, as if discussing your reading style behind your back. You can't quite make out the words, but you're fairly certain one page just called you hesitant. Which is a bold accusation, considering it's made entirely of paper. The encyclopedia waits, open on your lap, its weight pressing gently against you, as though reminding you that knowledge, especially useless knowledge, is always a little heavier than you'd like. The pages ruffle faintly, though there is no breeze. Perhaps the book sighs for itself, tired of containing so many things that don't exist. Under D, an entry begins, doorbell imaginary. This device, the text explains, rings only when you aren't home. It is powered entirely by the concept of missed opportunities, and when pressed, emits a sound no one has ever agreed on. Some describe it as a faint ding. Others claim it's more of a One footnote suggests that in certain regions, it's closer to the noise of an irritated pigeon. You pause at that, suddenly reminded of the time you watched pigeons fighting over a bread crust. They weren't even eating, just glaring at each other with the sort of intensity usually reserved for board meetings. The encyclopedia does not mention pigeons, of course, but you suspect they are always lurking somewhere between the lines. The next entry is egg, perpetual. Not a chicken egg, not even a duck egg. Just egg. It is described as always existing in the state of about to hatch, yet never actually hatching. An eternal promise of something that never arrives. The illustration shows an egg with a faint crack along one side, and if you stare at it long enough, you almost expect to hear tapping from within. But you don't. Instead, you remember breakfast. Toast, maybe. Or porridge. Or the peculiar hollow disappointment of opening a fridge and finding nothing but condiments, ketchup, mustard, and a jar of something unlabeled, whose contents you are no longer brave enough to investigate. Turning more pages, you find fountain silent. It looks like a perfectly ordinary fountain, marble basin, carved stone spout. But the encyclopedia insists that no water flows, has ever flowed, or will ever flow from it. It merely stands there, making the exact opposite of a splash. Visitors report feeling, quote, mildly refreshed, but slightly confused. A marginal note claims that some people still toss coins into it, though the coins are never seen again. Which is, now that you think about it, the case with most coins. They vanish into vending machines, sofa cushions, and the mysterious black hole of trouser pockets, never to return. The encyclopedia, of course, doesn't mention trousers. But trousers are implied. And beneath all this, tucked at the bottom of the page, lies a single word, giraffe, inverted. The description is minimal. Simply, a giraffe that begins with its head. No illustration. No clarification. Just that. Which is, somehow, worse than an explanation would have been. The encyclopedia grows heavier in your hands, as though amused at your confusion. And yet, for some reason, you keep turning the pages. The encyclopedia lies open, and the next section begins with hedgehog, transparent. A creature that is said to exist only in outline, visible only when the light hits at an angle you can't quite reproduce. The entry notes that it is harmless, though occasionally inconvenient, as one might accidentally sit on it. The illustration is just a faint dotted line. Staring at it makes you think of glassware, and how it never quite dries properly on the rack. You always find a faint line of water clinging stubbornly to the rim, no matter how patient you are. Perhaps that's the true nature of a transparent hedgehog, not a creature, but a persistence of small droplets. Flipping further along, your eyes rest on ink, perishable. This ink writes clearly for exactly 1 hour, then fades quietly into invisibility, leaving the page looking smugly blank. The text claims it was once popular among philosophers who enjoyed writing arguments they didn't want remembered. It was less popular among accountants. A small footnote mentions that perishable ink smells faintly of cucumbers, though nobody knows why. Which reminds you oddly of train stations, because they too often smell faintly of things they shouldn't: coffee, metal, and sandwiches wrapped too tightly in plastic. The entry doesn't clarify this. It just waits for you to finish remembering. Next comes jelly, architectural. Not edible jelly, not the cheerful wobbly dessert, but a building material. The encyclopedia insists entire bridges were once constructed from it. The bridges, unsurprisingly, collapsed immediately, though everyone agreed the wobbling had been impressive. It notes that a few staircases made of jelly still remain, though only in dreams. You find yourself wondering whether you've ever walked up a jelly staircase in a dream. Possibly. Although, come to think of it, you've had dreams about escalators that never quite reached the top, and those are essentially the same thing, just with less sugar. There is also kettle, endless. This kettle never finishes boiling. It rattles, it hums, it releases steam in delicate wisps, but it never quite whistles. The entry describes it as, quote, useful for people who enjoy anticipation more than tea. And you think of all the times you've stared at a kettle, waiting for the water to bubble, only to drift off into other thoughts. Laundry, phone charges, the quiet mystery of how one sock always develops a hole before its partner. The kettle is really about that. About things that take forever and never arrive, about the waiting itself being the point. Finally, at the bottom of the page, in smaller print, you find lamp, forgetful. This lamp turns itself on, then off, then back on again, unable to remember what it was meant to be doing. Sometimes it flickers, as if to say, I had an idea, before dimming back into silence. The encyclopedia assures you this is not a fault but a feature. Which, when you think about it, could also describe most conversations about the weather. The book closes itself gently, though you didn't tell it to. A faint puff of dust escapes, carrying the scent of things that never were. And the encyclopedia rests, quietly, as though pleased you've read enough nonsense for one sitting. The catalogue is not quite a book, not quite a scroll. It arrives in the mind, like an uninvited guest, carrying a clipboard. Inside, page after page of instructions, carefully numbered, meticulously detailed, and entirely unnecessary. The first page begins. Step 1. Take a napkin. Not any napkin. This napkin must be unfolded, then folded diagonally, then unfolded again. Nothing else will do. Once unfolded, it should be placed gently on a table, preferably one made of wood, though any surface will suffice except glass, which is too slippery. If you do not own a napkin, the catalogue helpfully suggests staring at your hand and pretending it is made of cloth. It will not work, of course, but the pretending is mandatory. Step 2. Stir nothing. Take a spoon, ideally one with holes in it, though any spoon will do, and place it in an empty cup. Stir vigorously for 30 seconds. Count out loud if you must, though the catalogue warns that numbers beyond 12 tend to sound impatient. At the end of 30 seconds, remove the spoon and set it aside. You may notice that the cup remains unchanged. This is the correct outcome. If the cup has changed in any way, you have done it wrong, or possibly slipped into another dimension. Either way, the catalogue does not elaborate. Step 3. Align your shoes. Not by size or color, but by mood. Shoes should be placed in pairs according to whether they look optimistic, bored, or faintly resentful. If you cannot tell the difference, simply arrange them alphabetically, though this may result in disagreements between left and right shoes, which are notorious for bickering. The catalogue suggests ignoring their complaints, as shoes rarely mean what they say. The text pauses here for a small note. Reminder: never whistle while buttering toast. No explanation. Just the instruction. It leaves you briefly wondering whether anyone has ever done so, and if so, what disaster followed. Possibly crumbs. possibly something else. The catalogue continues, page after page, each one calm, precise, and absolutely pointless. And still, you keep reading, because somehow, the pointlessness feels soothing. The catalogue flips itself to the next page as if eager to waste your time. Here the script is finer, each word written with the precision of someone who truly believed you would follow these steps. You won't, of course. But that has never stopped instructions before. Step 4. Fold a pillow into thirds. Take one ordinary pillow, square, rectangular, or vaguely potato-shaped, and fold it once, then twice. The third fold is impossible, but the catalogue insists you attempt it anyway. When it springs back into shape, sigh loudly and pretend it worked. If anyone asks what you are doing, reply, engineering. Do not elaborate. Step 5. Count the corners of the room. Begin with one corner. Label it corner 1. Move clockwise. By the time you reach corner 4, pause dramatically, as though something profound has occurred. If the room has more than 4 corners, pretend not to notice. If the room has fewer than 4 corners, you are probably standing outside. In which case, count clouds instead. If there are no clouds, count imaginary clouds. If you forget how many you've counted, start again, preferably from 7. Step 6. Balance a teaspoon on your knee. It does not matter which knee. It does not matter which teaspoon. All that matters is the quiet sense of triumph when the spoon wobbles, stays briefly, then falls with a soft clink. When it does, nod solemnly, as though a great experiment has been completed. If no spoon is available, substitute with a raisin, a pencil, or a vague sense of responsibility. Results may vary. At this point, a side note interrupts. Important clarification: never attempt to butter a balloon. Again, no context. No warning about why. Just the insistence that one should not. You imagine, briefly, what would happen if you tried slippery surfaces, confused expressions, a balloon sighing its last breath in disappointment. And you decide, without really deciding, that the catalogue is right. Step 7. Whisper the alphabet backwards. Do not sing it. Do not recite it quickly. Whisper. Slowly. As though confiding secrets to the letters themselves. If you reach the letter M and forget what comes next, invent a new letter and carry on. The catalogue reassures you this is allowed. It even offers suggestions: flom, sebel, cost. The exact spelling doesn't matter. Nothing does. The pages rustle softly, pleased with your progress. Although progress toward what is never made clear. The next page unfolds like a map that doesn't lead anywhere. Tiny arrows decorate the margins, pointing toward nothing in particular. The catalogue seems determined to guide you, though to what end remains obscure. Step 8. Rearrange a deck of cards according to temperature. Take a deck, or any stack of rectangular paper things. Decide which ones feel warm and which ones feel cool. Place the warm ones in one pile, the cool ones in another. If one feels neither, set it aside and declare it lukewarm. If you cannot decide at all, shuffle the whole thing, sigh, and start again. The catalog warns this may take several hours. If you lose track of time, that means you are doing it correctly. Step 9. Draw a circle, then stand inside it. It may be drawn with chalk, or string, or a finger moving lazily in the air. Stand in the middle. Close your eyes. Think about pineapples, but only briefly. Then stop thinking about them immediately. If you fail to stop, draw a second circle and step into that one instead. The catalog does not say what to do if the pineapple thoughts persist. Perhaps a third circle. Perhaps forever. Step 10. Pour water into a jar, then into another jar, then back again. Do this until the water becomes tired. You may not notice when it happens. The catalog advises listening carefully. Water, when fatigued, sounds slightly less enthusiastic. If no jars are available, use your imagination. Imagine jars of different sizes, one tall, one short, one oddly shaped like a shoe. Pretend to pour between them until you lose interest, which is the same as finishing. The margin here contains a scribbled note. Reminder: if you find a sock that does not belong to you, apologize to it. No reason given. Just an insistence on politeness. You picture a lonely sock, sitting quietly, receiving your apology with dignified silence. Somehow this feels correct. Step 11. Clap 3 times, then deny it. Clap once, twice, thrice. Then immediately insist you did not. Shake your head. Look surprised if anyone suggests otherwise. If alone, insist to yourself that no such clapping occurred. The catalog does not explain why. Perhaps it is a test of loyalty. Or perhaps it simply enjoys the confusion. Step 12. Fold the catalog itself. Fold the page, fold the whole book, fold it again, until it no longer resembles a catalog at all. When it crumples into a strange shape, place it gently in a drawer, preferably one that already contains mismatched cutlery, old batteries, or receipts for items you don't remember buying. Leave it there. Forget it ever existed. At least, until it reappears on the table again, somehow unfolded, waiting patiently for you to continue. The catalog sighs as though satisfied, though the sound may only be in your imagination. Its instructions fade into stillness, leaving you with the quiet impression that nonsense can be completed, even if it was never started. The dictionary is heavier than it looks, bound in a shade of gray that claims not to be gray at all. Opening it, you find each entry described not with precision, but with vague comparisons and odd detours. The first entry is blumble, a color often seen at the edge of a yawn. Not quite blue, not quite beige, something like the feeling of socks that are still damp from the washing line. Blumble is said to appear most clearly when you forget what you came into the kitchen for. It lingers in corners, sighs in hallways, and fades before you can quite point at it. Next is greeple. Not green, though it pretends to be. Greeple feels like the inside of a cardboard box that once held oranges, faintly citrus but mostly dust. It's the shade of waiting for a bus that may or may not arrive. Some insist it's cheerful, though only in the way a lukewarm cup of tea is cheerful, technically acceptable, but not inspiring. The dictionary offers no example swatch, just a blank rectangle where the color should be. Further along is scrumbly. This color is only visible when you close your eyes after staring too long at patterned wallpaper. It is not the wallpaper itself but the afterimage, stubborn and slightly itchy. Scrumbly hums faintly, though only if you think about it. It pairs well with silence, though silence of course is not a color. Unless it is. In which case, silence is probably scrumbly too. The next entry is flan. Described as the color of misplaced spoons. You know the spoon exists, you know it must be somewhere, but instead you find yourself staring into the drawer full of things that don't belong. Rubber bands, stray batteries, pens that don't write. Flan is the moment of recognition when you realize the spoon isn't there either. It is not a bright color. It is not a dark one. It is just flan. The page ends with zindel. Zindel is the color of forgetting mid-sentence. It arrives suddenly, replaces every other thought, and vanishes just as quickly, leaving behind only a faint buzzing in the air. Zindel is best seen while brushing your teeth and wondering whether you've already brushed them. The dictionary calls it the most useful of useless colors, though it does not explain why. The book pauses here, as if waiting for you to imagine the rest on your own. The next entry is marble dust. Said to resemble the exact shade of a forgotten attic smell, a mixture of cardboard, moth wings, and the faint sweetness of something once stored in glass jars. It's not brown, not gray, something in between that feels like it could crumble if you looked at it too hard. Marble dust is considered polite, always arriving quietly, never drawing attention. It leaves quickly too, like a neighbor waving from across the street, whom you can't quite place. Then there is clindle. A sharp, tinkling color. The dictionary insists it is heard rather than seen, like teaspoons colliding inside a drawer. If it had a shade, it would be the glimmer of light off water that refuses to sit still. Some people claim to glimpse clindle only when thinking about marbles, others when biting into an apple and finding it crunchier than expected. Either way, it is gone before you can explain it. The next page is devoted to woof. Woof is heavy, like a blanket in winter, or the moment you sink too deep into a sofa cushion. It has no edges, no definition, just a broad enveloping hush. Children are said to see woof most easily, usually around bedtime, when they insist their room has a fuzzy color. Adults forget woof, though they may feel it again when staring at laundry piles too long. It is not unpleasant, merely unhelpful. Further along you find prindle. The dictionary calls it the color of sentences that trail off. Prindle looks like someone meant to paint it, but stopped halfway, distracted by something else. It might be pink, it might be green, but mostly it is the shrug in between. Some compare it to the flavor of chewing gum long past its usefulness, still chewy, still present, but no longer committed to being anything at all. And then there is sneed. This entry is unusually short. Sneed is the color of bread crust that exists only in dreams. That's all it says. No further explanation. No diagram. You pause, wondering if you've ever dreamed about bread crust. You probably have. Or maybe you will now, which might be the point. The page flutters closed as if embarrassed by itself. The next entry is tornable. A color that flickers on the edge of memory, like a name you almost recall, but can't quite place. Tornable resembles the exact moment before a sneeze, not the sneeze itself, but the hovering anticipation. Some swear it's a pale green. Others insist it's closer to orange. The dictionary concludes, it is both, and neither, and mostly the waiting. Following that comes hollish. Hollish is the shade of an empty cupboard. Not the color of wood, or dust, or shadow, but the absence of expectation after you've opened the door and realized nothing useful is inside. Hollish hums faintly, like the forgotten vibration of a refrigerator in another room. It has been described as both comforting and disappointing, sometimes at the same time. Then there is Plim. Plim is quick, darting, impossible to hold still. It flashes when you misplace your keys, or when you remember an appointment exactly 3 minutes too late. The dictionary notes it as a cheerful inconvenience. It is said to taste faintly like mint, though no one agrees what it looks like. Possibly silver. Possibly pink. Mostly, it feels like tapping your fingers on a table without realizing you're doing it. Next appears drozzle. The page describing drozzle is stained, though no ink was spilled. Drozzle is watery, sagging, a shade that leaks rather than shines. It is the feeling of rain that stops just as you open your umbrella, leaving you with damp sleeves and a sense of futility. Drozzle has no edges. It seeps into everything, then vanishes, leaving behind nothing but a faint reluctance. Finally, at the bottom of the page is yibble. Yibble is the color of laughter you almost had, but didn't. It's the chuckle caught in your throat when the joke doesn't quite land, or when you remember something funny at the wrong time. Yibble sparkles briefly, then hides, embarrassed by itself. The dictionary describes it as a friendly interruption, but and as you read, you feel certain you've seen yibble before, though you couldn't possibly point it out again. The dictionary sighs and closes, as though it has run out of ideas, or perhaps just out of patience with itself. But still you sense there are more non-existent colors waiting, just beyond the next unread page. The bestiary opens with the chairhound. Not a dog, not a chair, but a creature that insists on being both. Its legs are wooden, slightly uneven, and it creaks when it sits down, though no one is certain where exactly it sits down, since it already is a seat. Chairhounds are said to wag their backrests when happy. They also shed upholstery in the spring, leaving small tufts of fabric that drift around like tumbleweeds. The text notes they are loyal companions, though not particularly comfortable. Next is the lampcat. A feline with a lampshade for a head, glowing faintly when it purrs. The light isn't strong enough to read by, but it is enough to make shadows of things that aren't there. Some claim lampcats wander at night, curling up on tables, and softly humming like dim bulbs. Others insist they've never seen one at all, though they often remember having turned off a light that wasn't switched on. That was probably a lampcat. Then comes the wardroost. A tall wooden bird with doors for wings and drawers for feathers. It stands in corners, still and solemn until opened. Inside, instead of clothing, one finds nests of folded socks, eggs of forgotten hats, and sometimes an umbrella chick pecking softly at the hinges. The bestiary remarks that wardroosts are shy, only opening for those they trust. If you've ever found yourself staring at a wardrobe and wondering what's inside, but never looking, you may have been in the presence of a wardroost. The following entry is the sofaphant. round, plush and faintly elephant-shaped, though with cushions for ears. It moves slowly, almost imperceptibly, shuffling an inch or two each night, so that over the years a sophafant may migrate from one end of the room to the other. They are social creatures, happiest when people sink into their backs, though occasionally they sigh under the weight of too many naps. If you've ever stood up and found a faint trumpet noise echoing in the distance, it was probably just a sophafant, expressing mild relief. The final entry on the page is the otter mouse. Small, round, and surprisingly quiet, otter mice often gather in pairs at the foot of a bed. They look like ordinary stools until you notice the whiskers twitching, or the faint squeak when you rest your feet. Otter mice are harmless, occasionally rolling themselves into sunny patches to doze. Their only habit of note is hoarding crumbs between their seams, which explains why they are so often found near couches. The bestiary pauses here, letting the reader imagine a room gently alive with furniture animals, each blending into its surroundings, each waiting for you to notice them just a little too late. The next page introduces the table fox, a long, low creature with a varnished back and a bushy tail that doubles as a tablecloth. Table foxes are clever, always slipping an extra inch to one side when you try to place a cup perfectly in the center. They like the sound of dice, the clatter of forks, the rhythm of elbows resting on them. If left alone too long, they curl up tightly, all four legs tucked beneath, pretending to be just another piece of wood. But if you listen closely, you can hear the faint rustle of their tails sweeping crumbs into neat little piles. Next comes the bookshelf. Tall, steady, antlered like a moose, but with rows of spines across its flanks. Each shelf is filled with books, though not necessarily the ones you own. Some are titles you've never heard of, others you are certain you misplaced years ago. The creature does not explain where it finds them. Bookshelves are calm by nature, rarely moving except to stretch a little taller when they sense you need more space. Sometimes, if they like you, they'll allow you to lean against their side, though they may grumble softly if you press too hard. The next entry is the rug slug. Flat, fuzzy, and patient. At first glance it seems like nothing more than a rug. But then you notice the faint, deliberate breathing, the gentle shifting of patterns, as though they're inching forward. Rug slugs enjoy warmth and sunlight, sprawling across floors like sleepy guardians. Occasionally they roll their edges just slightly, enough to trip an unsuspecting passerby, not out of malice but because they find it amusing. No one has ever seen a rug slug move quickly. They do everything slowly, like a thought that takes all afternoon to arrive. Following that is the cupboard wolf. Large, looming, with doors that swing like jaws. It howls faintly when opened too quickly, a long creak that echoes through the room. Inside one might find plates, cups, or sometimes nothing at all, depending on the wolf's mood. They are not dangerous, though they are known to guard biscuits jealously. If you hear a cupboard bang shut on its own, it is likely a cupboard wolf asserting its territory. Leave it be. It will calm down eventually. The final entry on the page is the bed serpent. A long, coiled creature disguised beneath blankets. It stretches from corner to corner, always larger than you expect, yet perfectly shaped for sleeping upon. When you lie down, the bed serpent exhales slowly, a sigh that sinks you deeper into its coils. It is said to dream along with whoever rests upon it, sometimes lending them dreams of rivers, sometimes of caves. The bestiary warns against poking too many lumps or wrinkles in the mattress. Those are the serpent scales, and it finds the fussing irritating. The book lingers on this page, letting the reader imagine an entire household quietly alive, patient, and just a little mischievous. The first creature here is the curtain moth. It looks like ordinary fabric, swaying softly by a window, but sometimes it stirs, even when there is no breeze. Curtain moths flutter at night, stretching their wings of patterned cloth to cover the room in half shadows. Some say they whisper when moved, their threads brushing together like tiny wings. They are not dangerous, though they do like to drift open just enough to let in a streak of moonlight, as if curious about what you are dreaming. Next is the hearthbeast. A chimney creature, old and slow, made of brick and ash. It hums faintly when fires burn, a low, rumbling sound like the contentment of something ancient. When no fire is lit, it snores instead, puffing out the occasional cough of dust. Hearthbeasts are guardians of warmth, though sometimes they grow too proud and scatter smoke through the room just to remind you of their presence. If you've ever watched flames and felt the fire was watching back, you've met a hearthbeast. Then comes the grand clocks. Tall, wooden, ticking steadily, except that its ticks sometimes sound suspiciously like heartbeats. The grand clocks is not in a hurry. It does not measure time so much as taste it. Hours stretch and bend beneath its pendulum, and occasionally it skips a second, simply because it feels like it. Some claim to have leaned against a grand clock's and felt it sigh, as though time itself had grown tired. Others say they've caught one blinking, though how a clock blinks is never explained. Further along is the mirror finch. At first you think you see your own reflection. But then the reflection tilts its head differently, moves a wing you don't have, and blinks with bright silver eyes. Mirrorfinches perch inside glass, flitting from pane to pane, always one step behind your own gestures. They feed on glances, fluttering away whenever you look too closely. If you've ever caught your reflection lagging behind, even for a heartbeat, you've glimpsed a mirrorfinch. The final entry here is the dormouse. Not to be confused with the small, sleepy rodent, this one is a door, hinged and wooden, with a handle that twitches like a tail. Dormice live between rooms, always listening, always waiting. When nudged, they open reluctantly, squeaking faintly in protest. They dislike being slammed and may sulk by sticking or refusing to latch properly. But they are loyal, always keeping out the things you'd rather not let in, and always offering a quiet way out when you need one. The bestiary closes itself softly, as if all these creatures have curled up to rest, leaving you in a house that might be alive, though too polite to admit it. The museum begins quietly, as most museums do. At first you wonder if it's open at all. There are no crowds, no ticket desks, no chatter bouncing off marble floors. Just a doorway standing politely ajar, humming faintly, as though the air itself is waiting for you to walk in. Inside, the lighting is dim, not gloomy, but softened into a kind of perpetual dusk, perfect for noticing the smallest of things. Here the exhibits are not paintings, not sculptures, not artifacts behind glass. Here the exhibits are sounds. Sounds too small, too fleeting, too unimportant for anyone else to collect. But somehow, they've ended up here. The first gallery holds the creak of a floorboard in an empty house. It hangs in the air like a rope suspended from nowhere, bending slightly under its own weight. Each step you take seems to echo it, as though the sound is trying to remind you of every room you've ever walked through at night. Beside it, carefully displayed, is the plink of a drip into a half-full sink. You can hear it clearly, though there is no sink, no water, just the sound itself, looping in its slow, patient rhythm. A label explains, collected from kitchens at 3 in the morning, when no one bothers to fix the tap. You nod as though this makes perfect sense. Wandering further, you hear the faint thud of a book closing itself. It is neither loud nor sharp but final in a way that feels personal. You cannot tell which book it was, or why it closed, only that the sound is here now, preserved like a pressed leaf. Across from it, another display holds the shuffle of papers being stacked by an invisible hand. They whisper against one another, restless, shifting like soft cloth. The sign beneath reads, "Unfinished work waiting forever." You find yourself imagining desks, pens, the half-thought you forgot to write down, and then the thought drifts away before you catch it. Deeper into the museum the sounds grow stranger. One alcove houses the cough of a chair adjusting itself. A low wooden groan, not quite a squeak, not quite a complaint. It feels like the sound furniture makes when it wishes it was somewhere else. Another holds the muffled pop of a jar lid that will not open. It repeats endlessly, the twist and struggle, the sigh of defeat, the quiet silence that follows. The plaque simply says, "Persistence, unopened." You nod again, though you're not sure to whom. The next room is darker, almost hushed, as though the sounds here prefer not to be overheard. You pause before a display labeled, "The sound of a drawer closing softly," when you meant to slam it. It's anticlimactic, shy, almost embarrassed to exist at all. Beside it is the flutter of curtains shifting with no wind. You listen carefully, though the flutter sounds suspiciously like breathing. Or maybe that's your own breath, echoed back at you. Hard to say. Further still, the museum offers the tap of a pencil dropped onto carpet. A sound so faint you almost doubt it happened. It's there though, thin, apologetic, as though the pencil regrets being clumsy. Next to it, the sound of shoes left alone in a hallway. Not footsteps, not movement, but the lingering echo of weight, of leather softening in silence. The plaque says, "Waiting to be worn again." You move into the final chamber, where the sounds are less like noises, and more like memories disguised as echoes. There is the sigh of a page turning when no one is reading. It is faint, restless, almost lonely. Next to it, suspended like dust in sunlight, is the click of a light switch that doesn't quite work. The click repeats, but the room never changes brightness. It feels oddly hopeful, like a gesture waiting for meaning. The last exhibit is tucked in a corner, barely audible. The sound of forgetting what you were about to say. It isn't silence. Not exactly. It's a small unraveling, like a thread pulled loose from a sweater, leaving you with nothing but a vague pause. It lingers in the air around you, gentle, indefinite, and then fades before you can catch it. The museum offers no gift shop, no exit signs. When you look back, the doorway is already gone. The sounds stay behind, still looping softly to themselves, while you drift further away, carrying only the faint impression of noises you never knew you remembered. The archive does not stand in any particular place. It seems to appear whenever someone asks for directions to somewhere that does not exist. A librarian might point vaguely, a stranger on the street might gesture, or a road might simply bend unexpectedly until you arrive before tall, unmarked doors. They are wooden, slightly warped, covered in scratches that look suspiciously like coastlines. When you push them open, the air inside smells faintly of parchment, dust, and an ink that never quite dries. The room is vast, yet strangely narrow, as though it stretches endlessly forward without widening. Cabinets line the walls, drawers upon drawers labeled in handwriting, too careful to be human. Some drawers are labeled with nonsense: the peninsula of forgotten keys, the river that refuses to flow upwards, the town shaped like a shoe. Others bear no words at all, just loops and spirals that might be letters, or perhaps failed attempts at them. You pull open the first drawer and find a stack of maps. The top one shows a continent shaped like a sleeping cat, curled around an ocean. Its mountains are whiskers, its rivers delicate veins of fur. The cartographer has drawn villages along the cat's spine, each marked with tiny paw prints instead of dots. Another map, tucked beneath it, shows a landmass folded like origami, with roads crisscrossing at impossible angles. A note in the corner reads, "Best viewed upside down." The ink smudges as you touch it, as though it's still drying after centuries. Further drawers reveal more curiosities. Islands connected by bridges that float in mid-air. A forest drawn not with trees, but with question marks, as though the cartographer gave up entirely. A desert sketched as a blank sheet of paper, no roads, no borders, only an instruction at the bottom: imagine the rest. You wander deeper, carrying none of the maps but remembering all of them, as if they insisted on staying folded inside your thoughts. The archive grows stranger as you go. The cabinets become taller, their drawers more elaborate, fitted with locks shaped like compasses. Some drawers creak open on their own, as if inviting you to peek, while others slam shut before you can even glance at them. One map shows a city laid out entirely on rooftops. The streets are tiles, the plazas chimneys, the gardens nothing but patches of moss clinging between shingles. There are no doors marked, only ladders and trapdoors scattered like secrets. Another map depicts a sea that refuses to stay still. Each time you blink, the coastlines shift, waves redrawing themselves across the parchment. A note at the bottom says, "Update hourly." Another drawer reveals maps of feelings instead of places. One is a chart of jealousy, drawn as a swamp with green fog rolling endlessly across marshy ground. Another is contentment, mapped as a plain where nothing ever changes, and the horizon always seems just out of reach. There is even a map labeled boredom, which at first looks like an empty sheet of paper. But when you tilt it slightly under the archive's dim light, faint lines appear. Roads that go in circles, rivers that loop back into themselves, towns with only one building each. It is a map of places you never want to visit, though you recognize them instantly. One particularly strange drawer holds maps that seem alive. A parchment with breathing mountains, rising and falling slowly as though inhaling. Another where the rivers actually flow, shimmering with ink that trickles across the page. and another where the stars rearrange themselves each time you look away, constellations shifting like actors between scenes. The maps whisper softly as you pass, not words but the faint rustle of parchment eager to be unfolded. You realize the archive is less about directions and more about possibilities, places that exist simply because someone once imagined them, then forgot. Near the far end of the archive, the drawers grow fewer. The cabinets thin out until there is only one, standing by itself in a pool of shadow. This drawer is unlabeled, its handle worn smooth from countless invisible hands. When you pull it open, there are no maps inside at all. Instead, you find faint impressions, like the outlines of maps that used to be there but slipped away. A coastline half erased, a mountain ridge faded to nothing, a riverbed that once flowed across parchment but has since dried out. These are the vanishing maps, the ones nobody remembers, even in imagination. Their places have dissolved, taken with them the names of towns never spoken aloud, the roads never walked, the lakes no one bothered to dream. At the very back you notice a single scrap of parchment. It is blank at first glance, but when you hold it up you see the faintest trace of a map that seems to mirror your own path through the archive. It shows corridors, drawers, corners you recognize, yet the path you've taken is slightly different, as though the map is redrawing itself from a version of you who walked another way. The longer you stare, the more the ink fades, until even that outline disappears, leaving you with nothing but empty parchment. You return the scrap, though you can't be sure you actually put it back. The drawer closes gently, sealing the maps away. When you turn to leave, you notice the archive's doors have vanished. There is only quiet, the scent of parchment, and the faint rustling sound of maps you will never quite remember once you wake. The library has no address, no door that looks like a door. It usually begins as a hallway you don't remember walking into, or a corner of a building that wasn't there yesterday. Perhaps you thought you were heading into a cupboard, or maybe just leaning against a wall to rest, and suddenly there it was, an endless corridor lined with shelves. The air inside is thick with the warm, slightly musty fragrance of old paper, the smell of dust, ink, glue, and the faint trace of candles long blown out. The shelves rise far higher than they should. When you tilt your head back, you see rows upon rows stretching into a haze, each lined with books in covers of every imaginable shade: velvet green, fading scarlet, cloth so worn it looks like the fabric of forgotten coats. Some books glow faintly, their spines breathing with a dim light, while others look perfectly ordinary, as though they might crumble at a touch. The librarian, if such a person exists, never appears. There is no desk, no catalogue, no one stamping cards. Instead, the shelves themselves seem to notice your presence. A book might lean forward slightly, waiting to be taken down, or a small whisper of pages turning might drift from the aisle you're about to enter. You follow the sound instinctively, like someone following a tune they half remember. The first book you open is heavy. It begins mid-sentence, with no title page, no introduction, simply plunges into a story already unfolding. The characters seem familiar, though you cannot recall where you've met them before. The words are gentle, flowing, endlessly slow. You read a page, then another, until you realize the story has circled back. It is not repeating exactly, but looping, weaving you through familiar phrases rearranged in slightly new ways. You read on, curious, lulled, never reaching an ending. You put it back. Another book waits, this one slimmer, bound in cracked leather. You open it to the final page, curious if it ends. But the final page is not final at all. It continues seamlessly into another, though no such page exists. You flip again, and again, yet every attempt to reach the conclusion only stretches the story further. The book smiles at you in silence, though of course books don't smile. Still, you're sure it does. You wander deeper into the library, each step muffled by carpets patterned with letters too small to read. The shelves seem to shift when you're not looking, arranging themselves into new passageways. Sometimes you glimpse stairs that lead upward, curling like question marks, vanishing into shadow. Sometimes you see ladders leaning against the shelves, but the moment you reach for them they are gone. You take another book. This one is bound in blue cloth, edges gilded, its pages featherlight. The story begins as a travelogue, describing roads and rivers and places that almost sound familiar. You follow the journey for a while, but then realize the road is circling back upon itself. The same inn appears again, though described slightly differently. The same river is crossed, though it flows the other way this time. The narrator insists he is moving forward, but you know he isn't. And yet you keep turning the pages, curious where the road will lead, though you already know. Another book begins with a single sentence stretched across dozens of pages. It flows on, never pausing, commas piling upon commas, as though the story is unwilling to take a breath. You lose track of where it began, unsure if it even had a beginning. The words are soft, lulling, carrying you like a current. You close the book and still feel the sentence continuing in your head, as though the story refuses to stop just because you stopped reading. The shelves are full of them. Books that insist on carrying you in circles. Books that rewrite themselves while you look away. Books whose margins are filled with footnotes, and the footnotes have their own footnotes, leading to still more until the commentary is longer than the story itself. Some books open to the middle, and then refuse to let you turn backward, always nudging you forward, but never to an end. Others skip pages entirely, leaping ahead, only to return you to where you began. It is impossible to tell whether these books are written this way on purpose, or whether the library itself insists they never conclude. Either way, you realize you could read here forever, never finishing a single story, and the library would be pleased. Eventually you come to the farthest aisle. The light is softer here, almost golden, as though the library wants you to linger. The shelves are not as tall now, but wider, deeper, filled with books so large they look more like doors than volumes. Each one hums faintly, like a bee drowsing in sunlight. You take down a book at random. It opens not to words, but to faint outlines, sketches of places you know, though you cannot say how. As you watch, the drawings sharpen, filling in with detail, a street corner you once passed, a room you used to sit in, a chair that felt particularly comfortable one afternoon. The book is not telling you a story, it is reminding you of one. And as you watch, the memories stretch further, blending into scenes you are not sure are yours at all. Perhaps they belong to the library. Perhaps they belong to no one. Another book opens to blank pages, but as you hold it, words appear slowly, one by one, describing you in this very moment. Your hand turning the page. Your breath. The way your eyes blink, just once, as you read. It describes these things as though they are happening inside the book, not outside of it. When you close it, the words vanish, leaving only the faint scent of ink. The last book you touch feels warm, alive, almost breathing. It opens to the middle, where the story has already been going on for some time. You try to read, but the words blur. You realize the book is not for reading, it is for being read by. The pages turn themselves, slowly, gently, as though studying you. You feel it noticing your pauses, your wandering attention, even the way your thoughts drift elsewhere. The library is not only endless, it is curious. It does not just hold stories. It holds you. When you finally place the book back on the shelf, the aisle has already changed. The way out is gone, though you are not troubled. In a library where nothing ends, departure is simply another story, and you have all the time in the world to find it, or not. The garden appears in a place that seems familiar, though you are certain you have never been here before. A gate made of rusted spoons arches overhead, tangled with vines that smell faintly of old paper and sun-warmed metal. The air is heavy with the scent of damp soil and forgotten things, but not unpleasantly so, more like the memory of a drawer you once opened long ago, half expecting nothing, and finding something unimportant but satisfying. Inside, the garden stretches wider than it should, paths winding between plants and objects that are difficult to classify. A watering can leans against a bush of spindly stems, its spout bent awkwardly, clearly designed for no particular purpose. Nearby, a teapot blooms like a flower, leaves curling gently upward, as though preparing for tea it will never pour. Everything here seems content in its uselessness, unaware that it has no assigned function. Even the stones along the path are smooth and rounded, but some are square, and some faintly float an inch above the ground, stubbornly ignoring gravity. You notice a chair growing from the earth, roots curling into the ground as if it had been planted like a tree. Its seat is slightly uncomfortable, its backrest wobbles, yet it has blossoms sprouting along the edges, pink and velvety. You sit, briefly, though you know sitting accomplishes nothing. A small wind stirs, carrying the faint clink of spoons, the distant sigh of a misplaced umbrella, and the whisper of leaves that have no branches. The garden becomes stranger the further you wander. A small fountain bubbles faintly, but instead of water it leaks soft, glowing sand that drifts lazily in the air before falling back into its basin. A broom leans against a low wall, bristles twitching, as though it is preparing to sweep something it cannot reach. Nearby, a broken umbrella spins slowly on its own, the ribs turning like the legs of a drowsy insect, though it is completely dry. You walk along the paths, discovering objects half planted, half forgotten. A clock with no hands, leaning against a bush of tiny bells, chimes faintly at moments that cannot be measured. A pair of shoes sits atop a stone, toes pointed awkwardly, laces twisting like vines that no longer know how to knot themselves. A teacup rests on the ground, tepid, though you are certain no tea has ever been poured into it. Each object has a story you cannot recall, and will likely never know, but somehow their purposelessness is comforting, like a lullaby whispered in a language you almost understand. A narrow path leads you to a small pond, its surface reflecting objects not present in the garden. A hat floating mid-air. A candle burning upside down. A feather spinning slowly, as though dropped by an invisible bird. You wonder briefly what it means, then realize you are not supposed to understand. The garden thrives in the absence of reason, and perhaps its purpose is simply to exist, quietly, endlessly. At the center of the garden, the objects begin to cluster more densely. A pile of keys rests in a hollow tree stump, none of them fitting any lock you can imagine. A basket of mismatched gloves waits beside a lamp that hums faintly, though no electricity flows through it. A mirror leans against a wall of ivy, but it shows not your reflection, but glimpses of objects you have touched elsewhere. Teapots, chairs, spoons, some in their proper place, most not. You pause on a bench made of stacked books, all bound in cloth, too fragile to read. The objects around you seem to sigh softly, their presence like a quiet chorus, neither speaking nor silent. Time stretches, but you cannot measure it. The garden ignores clocks and schedules alike. You feel a gentle pull to wander again, to examine each forgotten object, to follow paths that twist in impossible loops. And yet, for a moment you simply sit, letting the purposelessness settle around you like a warm blanket. The garden does not demand attention, nor does it offer answers. It exists for itself, and for you, briefly, if you choose to notice. And when you finally rise and leave, the objects remain, each quietly waiting for someone else, or perhaps yourself, to forget their purpose again. The tower is not easy to find, though you may have passed it many times. By day it looks like nothing more than a ruin, a tall, narrow structure of stone, weathered and dull, half swallowed by ivy. Its windows are hollow, its doorway little more than an arch of broken bricks. No sound escapes it then, save perhaps the faint rustle of leaves, or the occasional scrape of a bird's wing against its crumbling walls. But at night, the tower wakes. The air around it hums faintly, like the sound of a seashell pressed to an ear. The stones seem to stretch taller, leaning upward into the dark sky as though listening. The doorway glows faintly, silvered by moonlight, inviting without demanding. When you step inside, the air cools and the silence shifts, no longer empty, but waiting. The interior is a hollow shaft stretching upward, spiraling stairs clinging precariously to the walls. Each step creaks softly, not with weight but with memory. The stones themselves seem to murmur beneath your feet, faint syllables echoing without forming words. And somewhere far above, you hear the first whisper of echoes, restless, circling like moths around unseen flames. The stairs wind endlessly, though never steeply, carrying you upward at a pace you barely notice. Every few steps, you pass an opening in the wall, an arch with no door, a slit that might once have been a window. From each, the echoes drift outward, curling like smoke. One echoes with laughter, distant, faint, though unmistakably human. It is not joyous laughter, nor cruel, but something in between, the kind that lingers long after the joke has been forgotten. Another carries the echo of footsteps, hurried and soft, as though someone once ran through this place without reaching anywhere at all. Further along you hear voices that speak without words. The tones rise and fall, carrying rhythm yet no meaning. It is almost music, almost language, and entirely neither. You pause, listening, convinced that if you wait long enough, the sounds will arrange themselves into sense. But they do not. They only echo, circling back, fading, returning, never settling. Higher still, the echoes become stranger. The low rumble of thunder, though no storm passes outside. The quiet drip of water, though no rain has touched these stones in years. Even the faint, rhythmic beating of wings, large and deliberate, though nothing flies within the tower. Each echo belongs to something absent, something long gone, preserved only as sound. You realize the tower does not keep objects, or stories, or memories. It keeps what those things once sounded like. At last, the stairs reach a narrow platform beneath the tower's roof, open to the night sky. Here the echoes gather most strongly, swirling around you like invisible companions. They overlap, tangle, unravel, fragments of words, sighs of wind, laughter, footsteps, silence breaking itself again and again. For a moment, you feel them lean close. Not hostile, not friendly, but curious. The echoes seem to test the sound of you, the faint scrape of your shoes, the rhythm of your breath, the quiet pulse in your ears. They repeat these noises back to you, slightly altered, as though trying them on. Your breath returns slower. Your heartbeat comes back softer. Your silence echoes longer than silence should. If you speak, the tower answers, though never with your own voice. Sometimes it returns your words in whispers too faint to catch. Sometimes in booming tones that make the stones tremble. And sometimes not at all, just silence stretched so long that you forget what you said in the first place. Eventually you notice the sky above paling faintly, the edge of dawn creeping in. The echoes grow quieter, retreating into the stones, tucking themselves away until the next night. The tower shrinks back into ruin, its windows once again hollow, its doorway dull with shadow. Only a faint hum lingers in your ears, as though the echoes followed you, tucked inside your own breath. You descend slowly, though you are never quite sure when the stairs ended, or how you left. The night carries on, though the echoes remain, waiting, whispering to themselves in the tower that speaks only when darkness allows. You find the house almost by accident. It waits at the end of a road that feels less like a road and more like a thought you happened to follow. The building itself is neither large nor small, neither grand nor plain. It simply is. Its windows blink faintly with light that does not belong to lamps, and its roof curves in ways that roofs usually don't, sloping and bending as though it has shifted positions many times, trying to get comfortable. The door greets you not with a creak but with a sigh, a sound of old hinges resigned to endless opening and closing. Inside, the air feels thick with drowsiness, the atmosphere of a place that is not awake but not quite asleep either. Every corner hums faintly, every stair vibrates with some hidden rhythm, as if the house itself is breathing. And then you notice, the rooms are not quiet. Each one murmurs to itself, softly, faintly, the way a dream mutters in your head without asking permission. The first room you step into is dreaming of rain. Not real rain, not water falling from clouds, but the memory of rain told second-hand. The walls shimmer faintly as drops fall and vanish, never wetting the ground. A chair sits in the corner, rocking itself gently, as though listening to the downpour. A table sighs occasionally, though what it longs for you cannot say. The dream of rain is not sad, nor happy, just endlessly persistent, circling the room until you drift out again. The next room dreams of stairs that never lead anywhere. It contains nothing but a spiral staircase rising through the ceiling and descending into the floor, endlessly repeating. Each step creaks not with weight but with recollection, as though the wood remembers someone who once walked it but cannot recall who. You climb a few steps, but the higher you go the more the dream pulls away. You descend, but the bottom is equally elusive. Eventually you leave, realizing the staircase is not for climbing but for being thought about, endlessly, pointlessly. The house waits patiently as you move from room to room, each dreaming its own soft, unhurried dream. Further in, the rooms become stranger, heavier with their dreaming. One room is dreaming of a banquet, though no food exists on the long wooden table. Plates shift faintly, knives clink against nothing, glasses raise themselves in silent toasts. The smell of roasted bread and unfamiliar spices drifts through the air, though no fire burns in the hearth. Chairs shuffle back and forth as though invisible guests are adjusting themselves, leaning into conversations that never begin. You listen, hearing the faint murmur of voices that never form words. The room is satisfied with its dream, happy to continue feasting forever without ever serving a single dish. Another room dreams of a forest. The floor is soft with moss, the ceiling dripping faintly as if heavy with dew. Branches stretch through the windows, though the house stands nowhere near trees. You hear birds, but their calls echo oddly, as if coming from the far side of sleep. Shadows shift in corners like trunks bending in a breeze, though no air moves. The room's dream is thick, insistent, pressing against your skin until you feel bark might sprout from your arms if you linger too long. You leave quietly, brushing leaves from your hair that never really touched you. One more room dreams of forgotten corridors. The door opens into hallways that should not exist, folding back into themselves, lined with doors that never lead anywhere. Each corridor hums faintly with its own silence. The dream is not frightening but deeply disorienting, the way a forgotten word hovers at the edge of your memory, without revealing itself. You try one door, then another, but every attempt places you back where you began. At last you step backward, pulling yourself out of the dream back into the spine of the house. The corridor sighs, continuing to loop without you. At the very heart of the house you find the largest room, though it is not large in size, only in feeling. It is dreaming of a bed. A single bed, vast and endless, stretching wall to wall. The sheets ripple softly like tides, the pillows breathing as though alive. You walk across it as if crossing a plain, your footsteps sinking gently into the fabric. Somewhere far away the blanket rises and falls, the rhythm of a sleeper so enormous it could be the house itself. Here the dream of the house becomes clearer. Every smaller dream, the rain, the stairs, the banquet, the forest, the corridors, folds into this one, the dream of resting, of drifting, of holding all things without needing them to end. The walls hum like lullabies, the floor softens into silence. You feel the entire building curls slightly around you, not to trap, but to cradle, like a hand closing loosely around something fragile. When you finally lie down, the bed breathes beneath you, warm and endless. The murmurs of other rooms fade, their dreams softening into nothing more than distant sighs. The house does not demand you sleep, nor does it keep you awake. It only waits, endlessly patient, carrying its own dreaming forward whether you join it or not. Eventually, your eyes close. The last thing you notice is the sound of the door, far away, sighing itself shut, not to lock you in, but simply to keep the night quiet. And then, without realizing it, you are part of the house's dream, drifting gently, endlessly, in a place where every room hums softly to itself, and sleep continues forever. And so, the house keeps dreaming, as it always does, and perhaps you are dreaming too, drifting through its endless rooms, without needing to decide where you are, or what you are, or whether any of it is real. You don't need to hold on to the details, not the echoes, not the corridors, not the shifting stairs. They're already fading into the background, the way a picture softens when you close your eyes. All that's left is the rhythm, the slow rhythm of your breath, the gentle rhythm of your body settling heavier and heavier, the rhythm of night itself, stretching long and unbroken. There is nowhere else to go. Nothing else to do. You are already inside the dream, and the dream is already inside you. So let it carry you gently, further and further away, until there is nothing left but quiet. Good night.